The palace did not shake because someone screamed. It shook because someone finally stopped answering. One final request crossed royal channels. One final plea from Harry reached William. And when the response came back, it did not contain anger, emotion, negotiation, or even hesitation. It contained something far more devastating: a refusal. In that moment, the royal family stopped asking whether reconciliation could happen and started confronting a far darker question. What happens when two brothers stop being brothers at all? The message was supposed to be simple. Harry was not asking for titles. He was not asking for security, money, status, or a return to royal life. He wanted 10 minutes, just 10 private minutes before leaving Britain. No aides, no cameras, no carefully crafted palace statements, no royal machinery standing between two brothers who once shared everything. To the outside world, that request sounded small, almost insignificant. But inside palace walls, people immediately understood what was really being asked. Harry was not requesting a meeting. He was requesting one final chance. And that is why William's answer landed like a bomb. Because when the response returned through royal channels, it was brutally clear. No meeting, no conversation, no private audience, no exceptions. Those who witnessed the aftermath described something unusual. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. Harry stared at the response. Read it once, then again. The hope disappeared from his face so quickly that it felt like watching a light switch being turned off forever. The door had not merely been closed, it had been locked. Meanwhile, William sat with the request longer than many expected. He read it twice, not because he was confused, not because he was considering mercy, but because he understood exactly what those 10 minutes represented. A private audience between the brothers would have looked harmless to the public. Inside the family, it would have changed everything. It would have reopened a road William had spent years trying to close. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than a rejected request. Because William was not simply making a decision as a brother, he was making a decision as the future king. The prince reportedly placed the message beside him and allowed the silence to do the talking. No immediate answer, no emotional reaction, just distance. But behind that distance was a calculation that revealed how deep the wounds had become. William no longer saw reconciliation as a path toward healing. He saw it as a risk to Catherine, a risk to his children, a risk to the monarchy itself. Then came the phrase that sent shockwaves through palace corridors. The reconciliation channel was formally closed. To ordinary people, those words might sound bureaucratic, cold, administrative, but palace insiders immediately understood the true meaning. This was not a pause, not a delay, not a cooling off period. This was the institution officially acknowledging that peace talks between the brothers had reached a dead end. Suddenly, years of tension, interviews, accusations, memoirs, documentaries, and emotional wounds all seemed to collapse into one devastating conclusion. The bridge was gone, and what made the situation even more heartbreaking was that four people were carrying completely different versions of the same pain. Harry saw rejection, William saw protection, Charles saw failure, and the palace saw exhaustion. King Charles reportedly received confirmation of the decision and reacted with a sadness that many close observers found telling. The monarch had spent years hoping that time would accomplish what arguments never could. He believed distance might cool emotions. He believed age might soften old anger. He believed family history would eventually prove stronger than public conflict. But this decision forced him to confront something he had avoided for years. Time had not healed anything. The divide had only hardened. For Charles, the realization was painful. His sons were no longer standing on opposite sides of an argument. They were standing on opposite sides of a wall, and love alone was no longer enough to break it. William, however, appeared to carry the burden differently. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Those around him described a man who looked less like a winner and more like someone paying a price, because every royal decision creates a consequence, and William knew exactly what this one meant. The future king had spent years watching private family conflicts become public spectacles. Every conversation carried potential consequences. Every gesture carried risk. Every attempt at reconciliation carried the possibility of another disappointment. Then there was Catherine. People often focus on the conflict between the brothers, but Catherine's role in this story may reveal more than many realize. Those close to the situation noticed that she understood William's hesitation before anyone else did. She understood why the request was not merely about 10 minutes. She understood why reopening communication felt dangerous because the issue was never the meeting itself. The issue was what might come after. Another misunderstanding, another public interpretation, another wound reopened, another trust broken. And once trust becomes the casualty, even family ties begin to feel fragile. Harry, meanwhile, appeared to understand the odds before making the request. He knew he was no longer asking as a prince. He was asking as a brother, desperately trying to reach the one person whose answer mattered most. That is what makes the rejection so devastating. He was not requesting access to the monarchy, he was requesting access to William, and William's answer suggested that those two things were no longer separate. The palace could hide emotions behind formal language. It could issue statements. It could manage headlines. But one truth was becoming impossible to disguise. The truth is that William's refusal did not begin with Harry's final request. It began years earlier during a private conversation that few people outside royal circles even knew existed. While the public focused on interviews, documentaries, headlines, and public appearances, the real fracture was growing behind palace walls where cameras could not follow. According to accounts that circulated within royal circles, Charles once arranged a quiet meeting at Windsor in the hope that one honest conversation could succeed where years of distance had failed. The setting was carefully chosen. No public pressure, no media attention, no royal spectacle, just two brothers sitting face to face with an opportunity to say everything that had remained unsaid. But instead of healing wounds, that conversation reportedly exposed how deep those wounds had already become. Harry spoke about loss. That is why the last request was never truly about 10 minutes. It was about history. It was about whether years of damage could suddenly be erased through one private conversation. William apparently believed the answer was no. The risk felt too great, the consequences too unpredictable, the memories too painful. When Harry's request arrived through senior palace channels, those around William reportedly sensed the atmosphere change immediately. A simple message had entered the room, yet it carried the weight of decades. Everyone understood what was being asked. One final chance, one final conversation, one final attempt to stop permanent distance from becoming permanent reality. But William's answer came without hesitation. There is nothing left to negotiate. Those words echoed far beyond the room in which they were spoken, because they revealed something larger than frustration. They revealed finality. Harry had approached the situation as a brother. William responded as the future king. That difference changed everything. Family emotions were no longer directing events. Institutional priorities were. Formal channels would now handle communication. Direct access would disappear. Personal contact would become controlled correspondence. What had once been a brotherhood was transforming into protocol. Inside the palace, the emotional consequences spread quickly. Staff members reportedly lowered their voices when discussing the situation. Conversations stopped when Harry's name appeared. People who had spent years hoping for reconciliation quietly accepted a painful reality. The uncertainty was over. The answer had arrived. Charles felt the weight of it perhaps more than anyone. For years, he had imagined a different ending. He had hoped his reign would witness healing rather than division. He had hoped that time would eventually reunite the sons who had once stood together through unimaginable grief. Instead, he found himself watching history move in the opposite direction. Yet even Charles chose not to intervene. That decision may reveal the deepest truth of all. The king understood that forcing reconciliation cannot create trust. It can only create another performance. William's boundary remained intact because even Charles could see that the damage had reached a point where royal authority could not repair it. By the following morning, what began as a private family wound had become a national conversation. Headlines exploded. Commentators debated. Supporters chose sides. Some viewed William's decision as strength. Others viewed it as coldness. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Something fundamental had ended. The image that haunted people most was not two princes arguing. It was two brothers who once walked behind their mother's coffin, now standing on opposite sides of a door that neither seemed capable of reopening. Harry was left carrying an unanswered note and a conversation that would never happen. William carried the burden of a decision he believed necessary but clearly did not enjoy making. Charles carried the heartbreak of watching hope lose to reality, and the monarchy carried a truth it could no longer hide. Reconciliation was no longer waiting in the shadows. It was no longer a secret plan protected from public view. It was gone. The palace did not announce victory. It announced acceptance. The road back had ended. Trust had run out. And in the silence that followed, one one painful reality became impossible to ignore. The monarchy could survive the conflict. The institution could move forward. But the brotherhood that once defined William and Harry had become a memory. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is that nobody inside the palace seems to believe there is another chapter waiting to be written. The request was denied. The door remained closed. And the silence that followed felt louder than any royal scandal that came before it.